Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about what should have been the first installment, instead of the next installment, of Gen 13. I'll explain what I'm talking about once we zoom in and take a closer look. First published in February of 1994, Gen 13 number 1 is the first issue in what was originally supposed to be a 4-issue miniseries, but became a 5-issue miniseries, and predates Gen 13 number 0. I, however, did not realize this, as I had never really read much Gen 13 when this originally came out, and the collection I bought had Gen 13 number 0 at the beginning of the box. So I just thought that whoever owned that collection before me had everything in chronological order. However, I was wrong. I should have double-checked. I do apologize. We all make mistakes. We see here on the front cover all of the team featured in different sequences, all the characters getting a little bit of love on the front cover. I should also point out that this is the first printing. If you got the second printing of this book, it comes with a completely different cover that looks like this. As you can see here, this looks totally different. It's more of a classified file being opened with pictures of all the different team members. One thing I do find really funny about this cover is the inclusion of a 3.5-inch floppy disk on the table that this is all sitting on, mostly because the Wildstorm books in particular feature what I would consider to be a rather impossible level of futuristic technology for the 1990s in terms of weaponry and computers and space stations and spaceships and aliens from other worlds. But for some reason, the artists who were drawing this still reverted back to using what would have been current generation storage technology. I just always found that amusing. Story: Jim Lee, Brandon Choi. Pencils: J. Scott Campbell. Inks: Alex Garner. Colors: Joe Chiodo. Color separators: Ben Fernandez, Joe Dunn, Jessica Ruffner. Letters: Chris Eliopoulos. Ink assistant: Sandra Hope. Color assistant: Wendy Fouts, Monica Benet, Paige Apfelbaum. Production: Dennis Heisler, Chris Milos. Editors: Deborah Marvin, Bill Kaplan. That's a lot of people. And if you watched last week's video, I made a joke about the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe number 2 comic having a ton of people working on it, and that must be a DC thing because they have money to burn. However, after going through this comic book, I believe that might be just a Jim Lee thing, as he was the editor-in-chief, and still is to this day, at least at the point I'm recording this video, at DC Comics, so maybe he's just the one who's assigning tons of people to work on a single book. We see here that this book starts off in the year 1979 on a dark and stormy night, rather cliche, but also foreboding, as we see two people running through the rain, carrying their children, trying to escape the pursuers. Unfortunately, they are cut off as their pursuers find them and shine a light on them and are ready to take aim at these people before they can escape to the safety of the tree line. Sadly, the mother, whose name is Rachel, is cut down by the soldiers following in crazy futuristic hover pursuit vehicles, once again kind of playing into the idea of how do they have this crazy over-the-top level of technology for their weapons, but they're still using 3.5-inch floppies as their storage devices. And she is killed instantly. Her daughter, Nicole, falling with her. Her husband, Stephen, is obviously distraught, as well as her son, Matthew. Stephen, however, is not going to take this lying down, as he is shown now to have some sort of powers and causes one of the vehicles to explode instantly. It's then realized by the soldiers that he is part of Gen 12. However, using this power causes Stephen to collapse to the ground in horrific pain as he instructs Matthew to take his sister Nicole and run for the trees and get to safety, that he will do his best to hold off the soldiers from pursuing them. Matthew decides to try and contest, stating that he doesn't want to leave his father. However, Stephen tells his son that he needs to get away. It's too late, that he's done for. The only thing that matters now is that the two kids get to safety, and Matthew agrees and decides to make a break for it. We then see as the rest of the soldiers are about to open fire, the CO tells them that the children are to be taken alive as he takes aim at Stephen. But he does say, "Forgive me, Stephen," which infers that he and Stephen have a or a past, I should say. And I'd also like to point out that despite this being a weird type of futuristic rifle, it does have a very somewhat period accurate representation of what laser sight technology looked like in the 1970s. But that's neither here nor there. We see that Matthew, who is wearing a Darth Vader t-shirt, kind of surprising that Lucasfilm let him get away with that, is horrified to see his father gunned down in front of him as he freezes, unable to move with the shock and terror of witnessing both of his parents murdered, as it fades to black, and we are then teleported to 1994 on the campus of Princeton University, as we join up with the main character of this issue, Caitlin Fairchild. She is attending her sophomore year. She's trying to maintain a 4.0 GPA so that she can hopefully get accepted into some lucrative summer intern projects that she's applied for. She moves back to her dorm to do some studying as she walks in on her roommate, who is getting dressed for a date. She apparently has a new boyfriend, as her old boyfriend was too smothering, as she states that she needs a lot of space, as is illustrated by her stuff being thrown all over the dorm room and Caitlin's side being very clean with just a twin bed and a computer desk. I'd also like to point out, I find it funny, the posters on the wall of these made-up bands, which are REN and the Red Hot Pepper Chilies. I thought that was amusing. I also really appreciate the inclusion of this waterbed, which I know they kind of don't exist anymore, but they were pretty prevalent in the 90s. I find this pretty hilarious. Caitlin's roommate then informs her that a group of men were here looking for her. Caitlin mistakenly thinks it might have been guys who were potentially interested in her. However, her roommate tells her that they were middle-aged men who worked for the NEC or the NSA or something along those lines, as she walks out the door headed towards her date and asks Fairchild to possibly not be around later on, as she and her date may be coming back to the dorm. Caitlin, however, falls asleep studying and is awoken by a knock at the door. She's surprised by this, given that it's quite late, as she opens it up and is greeted by said government agents who were at her dorm room earlier. They tell her that she needs to come with them at this moment to get ready for the intern project that she applied for, one of, and that the project starts in the morning. Caitlin seems confused by this, as she asks them what's to be done about her classes the next day and who's going to inform her family. The men tell her that this is all being taken care of by the government and that she needs to come with them right away. We are then teleported to the I.O. SciTech Bureau office in Washington, D.C., as we are introduced to Ivana, who is in charge. She is talking to none other than Jack Lynch, who we've met multiple times throughout other different Wildstorm comics. He's the director of I.O. Security, and he's here to find out why exactly Ivana is using some of his Black Razor teams. She says that it's just for extra security, but he is a little skeptical about this, as the last time that they were used, some things went wrong, and the only reason that they weren't completely thrown to the wolves on it was because the CIA took the fall for them. Jack then is told by Ivana that it's because they're trying to protect a facility where they are reopening the Genesis project and using the codename Gen 13, which would be the next iteration numerically. And we find out also in this issue that Jack was part of Gen 12 and also Team 7, which I was unaware of in the other books that I had read where he's featured. And she also informs him that Craven is the one behind all of this, and he wants to set up his own superpowered being team. She lays down some pictures on the table that we see of Caitlin and Grunge, stating that they've already found a couple of people who are basically the children of Gen 12 members, which is why they believe they're most likely going to take to the experimentation and the drugs that will awaken their super abilities. Lynch then protests again, saying that it's too dangerous for them to try and reopen the Genesis Project, given what happened before with that and Team 7. Ivana then counters, saying that this is the only reason that Lynch is concerned is because of what happened with Team 7 apparently abducting his son and him never knowing the whereabouts of his son to this day. Lynch counters, saying that his concern is that because Gen 12 essentially went rogue and started I don't know if necessarily war against IO is correct, but IO did lose complete control of the project, that it poses a real danger, and he doesn't believe that Ivana can prevent that from happening again. However, she states that she can, as she gives the example that she already has 2 prodigies of Gen 12 in her possession, and that if they're any indication of the amount of power in these children, that there's a lot to gain from potentially awakening those powers in said children, as we are teleported to meet up with none other than Matthew, who is now all grown up, and he is training in what assumedly is an IO facility with some high-level martial artists, we're led to assume, as they seem to have trouble hitting him until one of them connects with some nunchucks, and then they all begin to mock and laugh him as they state that he's not as good as he thinks he is. Matthew takes some serious offense to this and does not like being the butt of a joke, as we see him turn around with his eyes igniting in a very similar fashion to the way his father's did at the beginning of this book. And this surprises the men he's training with, as they apparently didn't know that he had this ability. Unfortunately for the man who struck Matthew with the nunchucks, he was the victim in Matthew's sights as we see his head explode. The other martial arts trainers are obviously shocked and terrified when they see this. Matthew then mocks them, saying that he dares them to laugh now as he's proven that he is indeed the master. They all run away as they believe him to be some sort of a demon. We then see him open a vial and take a whiff of some sort of gas, which apparently is what prevents him from succumbing to the crippling pain that his father had when he used these powers. We then see his sister, Nicole, sitting off to the side of the panel, start applauding as she begins to state that, while Matthew does have some powers, it's still not really in comparison to their father's. Even though he can subdue the pain, their father was able to take out an entire Black Razor assault team. And she then starts to talk to him about how they should potentially start digging into each other's memories to see if they're even siblings, implying some sort of weird sexual fantasy, which Matthew quickly rebuts, saying that he's not one of her Chippendale manservants, as we see in the background right here. And she responds by giving him the finger and saying that he is too much of a stick in the mud. Also, I'd like to point out that, I understand the target audience of this book is 13-year-old boys, but my God, J. Scott Campbell is laying it on kind of thick with this outfit. I understand that, okay, here's this hot-looking chick, but she's literally wearing an outfit like she works at a strip club. Like, this is apparently supposed to be her workout gear as we see her on this piece of gym equipment. Who the heck works out in something like this? And why is she wearing sunglasses indoors? I get it. You're going for an aesthetic. I just think he's laying it on kind of thick in this panel. We then see on the next page that Fairchild is brought to the facility, which is located in Death Valley, New Mexico. She's impressed by how the facility is built into the side of a mountain and is surprised that it's so heavily guarded, but the men escorting her say that security is of the utmost importance and they really don't want other people poking around where their noses don't belong. We see that also in the facility, Lynch is here to interview Matthew. Matthew seems somewhat impressed at first by meeting Lynch, as he has yet to ever meet someone else from Gen 12 besides his parents, and that he's also impressed by the fact that Lynch was a member of Team 7. Lynch proceeds to tell him that he needs a favor from Matthew, apparently because Matthew is a Project Genesis prodigy, and his powers have been awoken. He can also, I guess, sense other, Project Genesis powered beings whose powers are unawoken if he's in their vicinity. And he asks if Matthew can potentially let him know if he comes across someone who may match the description of Lynch's son. However, Matthew tells him that he doesn't answer to Lynch, he answers only to Ivana, and that he cannot help him as he excuses himself. This, of course, doesn't go over well with Lynch, as he tells Matthew that this is far from over. We then see later on in the day that Fairchild is being escorted to her room by her handler, Helga, who continues to reassure her that despite the fact that this all seems very strange, it's all on the up and up, and she'll also be getting a large stipend for paying for college as part of her payment for participating in this project, which starts to put Fairchild a little bit at ease, as we see then she is lying in bed still studying and reading the material that she was given. And then we see a shot of the moon over the skyline of the New Mexico desert. Fairchild is then awoken early the next morning by a robotic voice alarm, as she seems groggy and somewhat surprised by the voice alarm, which she refers to as HAL 9000, which is kind of a little bit of a funny joke. She gets ready and steps out of her room, trying to find the cafeteria, when she is shocked to see the scene of Grunge running full sprint down the hallway, trying to escape a doctor who is wanting to give him an injection, and Grunge is apparently afraid of needles. This, however, is somewhat unbelievable to us as readers, given that Grunge has a full chest tattoo. Nevertheless, he doesn't seem to realize that Fairchild has stepped out into the hallway, as he runs smack into her, knocking her onto the ground and falling on top of her. This is all witnessed, of course, by two other members of their pod group, as one of them states that that's just Grunge's way of saying hello, as she introduces herself as Roxy, and the man standing beside her's name is Bobby. She, however, is then cut off when Helga comes up from behind and scolds her for smoking, which apparently she's not allowed to do in the facility. We then see Grunge get off of Fairchild and apologize again for running into her. Fairchild introduces herself as she tries to put herself back together after being run over by a guy who's twice her size, and put her glasses back on. As the group continues to make small talk, they are interrupted when Helga yells at them all to get to their workstations and begin their training, as we see a montage of the entire group engaging in different methods of training. Grunge, obviously the most physically fit of the group, excels at all of the physical bits, while we see Roxy struggling to keep up on a treadmill, and Fairchild getting pinned underneath a bar while she tries to do a bench press. We also see Bobby in this tube having experiments and tests run on him. However, Fairchild, obviously the smartest of the group, as she excels at computers, as we see Grunge also trying to copy off of her test, and Roxy over on the side filling out all of the bubbles on her test to make a picture of Mickey Mouse instead of actually trying to get the right answers. On the next page, we see that we get a fold-out pinup of the Gen 13 group by Jim Lee and Alex Garner. I had to zoom out a little bit to get the entirety of this in. As we see, it features the 4 team members here with Fairchild, Grunge, Roxy, and Bobby all geared up, ready to engage in some sort of battle, as they're all carrying some kind of crazy over-the-top future weapons, and Grunge also has a grenade bandolier that is loaded up with either beer or soda cans. I can't really tell. Also, a lot of smoking being done in this entire comic book. This was right around the time that Marvel had just stopped using the use of tobacco products in all of their comic books. But I guess Jim Lee and J. Scott Campbell were trying to make a statement that, they were going to do whatever they wanted and they didn't really care about that kind of thing. Obviously, it's not that big of a deal if you're not really marketing your book to a younger generation the way that Marvel was at that time. But, stylistically, I understand. It makes sense. There's going to be some people in the world who are going to smoke. But there are times where it feels like it's a little gratuitous in some of these books. Jim Lee specifically had a real knack for filling out a lot of panel piece with just smoke coming off of a cigarette or a cigar of some kind. And while it does look really cool, it also seems like a way for him to get out of drawing some background if he can. And I'm not saying that's what's happening in this book, but it does happen occasionally. And I don't know, it might have also just been their way of trying to poke fun at Marvel. Either way, it's still around, and we can see it right here on this poster, which, by all accounts, actually is a pretty cool poster. On the back of the poster and on the next page, we get 2 advertisements for Wildcats issues 10, 11, and 12, which will be a 3-issue story arc that will introduce the character by Chris Claremont, Huntsman. I have not gotten far enough into Wildcats at the recording of this video to have reached this point. However, if you'd like to know more about Wildcats, check out my Wildcats playlist, and I do promise eventually I will get to the issues that feature Huntsman. Here on the next page, we see that the progress of the 4 cadets is being monitored very closely by none other than Nicole and Matthew, as they watch them on computer monitors from an interior portion of the base. And Nicole states that she believes that Roxy and Bobby are showing some serious promise. However, Fairchild and Grunge are not displaying any powers whatsoever, and she believes that they might be a wash. And Matthew tends to agree, stating that with enough practice and training, Roxy and Bobby could be field ready within a couple of months, but he's not sure what to do about the others. They're then instructed, apparently over a video conference call of some kind, by Ivana, who is still in Washington, to up the dosage of drugs that they are being given in their food, so that hopefully it awakens the powers in Fairchild and Grunge. However, if they don't show any improvement, they're to be discarded, which I'm guessing means killed after another day. We then see that evening that Fairchild is awake studying her materials, but is dealing with a very bad headache, which seems to be getting worse as she's been dealing with this the entire time they've been at the facility. She then suddenly gets very sick to her stomach and leans over and vomits off the side of the bed. She realizes that she needs to see a doctor and tries to head out and find the infirmary. However, it's completely empty this time of night, and she assumes everybody is asleep, and she doesn't know exactly where the infirmary is, so she sets out on her own to try and find it. Fairchild then keeps wandering around and turns a corner as she finds a set of doors, but is surprised that the automatic doors are not working. She pushes them open, not realizing that apparently her powers are starting to awaken, as we see she leaves deep indentations into what is assumedly a very thick steel security door with just her fingers, as she enters a room she's never been to before and finds a giant supercomputer. She begins to log on and finds the name Fairchild, which she assumes is hers, until she realizes that it's Alex Fairchild listed on the computer screen, which is her father's name. However, before she can dig any deeper, she is surprised by none other than Grunge, who drops down from the ceiling through a vent. This, of course, startles her as she falls back into the wall, smashing into an alarm button with her elbow. Apparently a silent alarm, as it's not producing any kind of noises that any of these kids can hear. Grunge then falls down from the ceiling with apparently ice cream in his hand, as Fairchild is rather shocked, and then Roxy falls down from the ceiling as well, and they explain that they've been sneaking through the vents to go to this room every night to get some privacy, and while it is a top secret lab or computer room that they're not supposed to be in, it is free of security cameras. Fairchild then seems surprised to be told that there are cameras and starts to say a sentence about how they've been being watched when she's interrupted by a security guard who is dressed in the same garb as a member of the Black Razor assault teams, as he states that they have no business being there and wants them all to explain themselves, as he throws Fairchild into the wall and points a gun at her face. This, of course, is very terrifying to her, as we see her starting to tear up and wonder what the heck is happening. However, the security guard is grabbed from behind by Grunge, who doesn't take kindly to the way that he's treating Fairchild, and, feels like he's being way too rough with her, and then tries to explain that they're all members of the Gen 13 project. However, the guard tells Grunge to shut up as he punches him. Grunge is on the ground somewhat hurt as Roxy yells at the security guard, telling him that he needs to settle down. The security guard says that he's going to do a whole lot worse than that if they don't tell him what's going on and explain themselves. However, when Fairchild tries to do this as she stands up, he wastes no time in backhanding her across the face, smashing her glasses and knocking her onto the floor, and telling her that he said not to move and that she needs to stay down. We see her now on the ground, bleeding from her lip, and her garment's starting to tear a little bit. And then the guard tells her to just play it smart and stay down. However, Fairchild then begins to, power up, as we see energy starting to emit from her eye, as she states that it was a mistake for him to hit her, and it's the last one that he's going to make. She then proceeds to hit the guard in the face and knock him out in one punch in this all vertical page shot. You know how much I love those. She then falls to the ground, and stating that her head is pounding and her whole body feels like it's on fire. Roxy and Grunge are somewhat surprised and not sure how to react when they see that Fairchild's body is growing before their eyes, as she looks down at her tattered clothes and realizes that she's become, probably at least a third, if not 50% larger than she was, and is wondering what the heck is going on, as we see this is the last page of the story, and it's to be continued in 30 days. On the next page, we get a letter from J. Scott Campbell, kind of explaining, all of the stuff that's going on with Gen 13 and the team that's putting it together. And he also explains how to get your hands on a copy of Gen 13 number 0, which involves, unfortunately, cutting out this part of the book so that you can mail away this coupon that exists in what was supposed to be all 4 issues of the Gen 13 miniseries. Then you mailed it away with $2 shipping and handling, and they mailed you back a copy of Gen 13 number 0. The reason I called this unfortunate is because if you were to do this, you would actually ruin the final page of the book, which is on the opposite side of this coupon. Now, they apparently realized this because in the second printing of this book, they don't have this coupon on the back side of this page. It's on the back side of the very last page of the book, which you're still going to mar the comic to a degree, but you're not going to be marring part of the actual story of the comic. So kudos to them for at least trying to rectify a mistake they made in the original printing. We then see the Gen 13 sketchbook with behind-the-scenes look at the development of the series by Jim Lee and J. Scott Campbell. We see here a prototype of a cover of what may have been the first book, and we see that the original title apparently was Gen X. Now, those of you who think that Jim was possibly trying to steal this from Marvel would technically be wrong, seeing as that this book released in February of 94 and Gen X's first appearance in Marvel didn't happen until later that year in November of 94. However, I feel like it's possible that maybe somebody that Jim was still friends with at Marvel clued him into what Marvel was working on at that time so that he didn't publish this book under the title of Gen X and potentially get himself into a legal battle of sorts with Marvel Comics. Even if Jim Lee and Wildstorm had basically been in the right and had ownership of the Gen X moniker, Marvel still had endless pits of money that Jim could have never matched and could have drawn out that court battle for years, and it would have been a huge drain on the funds of Wildstorm. So, in all likelihood, if that's what took place, it was probably for the best that Jim decided to not use the Gen X moniker to describe this book. Again, this is all just conjecture on my part. That may not have been what happened at all, but it does seem like a very likely scenario as to why he may have chosen to change the name of the book to Gen 13 instead. We then see some sketches of Fairchild. Also, I find it kind of funny that, you know, Fairchild is supposed to be like the goofy nerd girl, but the reality is this is a very cliche thing that was done in the 90s and early 2000s. In fact, it's even made fun of, I believe, in Not Another Teen Movie, where the quote-unquote frumpy nerdy girl is actually a super smoking hot girl who just happens to have her hair up in a ponytail and wear glasses. And the moment that she takes those two things off, she's suddenly like practically a supermodel. I mean, obviously Fairchild's powers did give her a much larger and more toned physique, but I mean, the way that she's drawn by J. Scott Campbell, she's still drawn as a very attractive young woman. We then see some sketch images of grunge with different designs for possible tattoos that he would have had. Also some sketches of the rest of the team, Roxy up here, and a design for a t-shirt for Deathmate Black. Once again, I do have all the issues of Deathmate. I will get to them eventually. It's just finding the time in the long list of books that I want to get to and make videos about. On the last page of the book, we see an advertisement for Kindred. I know I have Kindred #1. I don't know if I have all the issues of Kindred, but I gotta check to make sure that I do before I start making videos about that. And also, on the reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement for Deathblow #3. This is also one of the places where the second printing has a little bit of a difference to it. As I'm trying to remember, I think the reverse inside cover has an advertisement for Wildcats, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. I'd have to check it again. But either way, it doesn't have an advertisement for Deathblow #3. And that was Gen 13 #1 of the Gen 13 miniseries. I thought this was actually a pretty good book. It is a lot of story that's covered in this first issue, but I feel like it actually flows pretty well and makes sense, unlike the first issue of Wildcats, which is really difficult to follow at times just due to how much they bounce around between different locations and different characters and try to just introduce way too much in one issue. Gen 13 has a lot going on in this first issue, but it all comes together well, and the story actually flows really well, does a good job of introducing you to all of the main characters and the major players in the book without making it confusing in any way. Um, Also, another thing I'd like to point out, you may not have noticed in this video, and I'm not sure how well it showed up on camera, this book was not printed on gloss pages, but it was also not printed on newsprint. It's some other kind of paper that, in my opinion, looks amazing. The colors on this paper just pop, and it looks absolutely beautiful in real life, to the extent that if you weren't feeling it with your fingers, you almost wouldn't realize that it wasn't gloss. That's how well the colors and the inks like all pop on these pages. I really would like to know what type of paper they were using, because I really believe this is something that the comic book industry should still be using to this day. I know gloss is kind of the standard, but I actually prefer paper over gloss for the simple fact that gloss pages have a tendency to pick up smudges, which is one of the reasons I always wash my hands before I ever read any of my comics, is to get all the oils off of my hands so that I don't leave fingerprints on them. Unfortunately, when you're buying comics that belong to other people before you, they may not have thought about doing that, and sometimes you have smudges and fingerprints on books, and you're just kind of stuck with it because, somebody else didn't take the same kind of care that you did. But otherwise, like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was pretty good, but those are just my opinions. Your opinions may differ. You might have thought this book was terrible. But either way, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.